Hi, I'm Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week we have a very special guest. Her name is Celeste Frazier, and she's an inspirational speaker, podcaster, counselor, visioning facilitator, teacher, and writer. She's directed outreach ministries to convalescent homes, children's hospitals, hospices, and prisons, providing shut-ins with love and light. And her books are available on Amazon and Kindle, and her website is celestefrazier.com. But the thing that really got me to want to interview her is that she has a degree in consciousness studies, and I could not be more intrigued by any subject than consciousness studies. So with no further delays, Celeste, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Awesome. And we usually just ask a couple background questions, which is where did you grow up? How old are you? And what generation, if any, are you a member of?
I am in a suburb of Chicago called Forest Park, and I grew up in Chicago, and I am 64, almost 65 in about 3 weeks. And yeah, I am baby boomer.
Awesome. So I'm just going to start straight up with consciousness studies. It may not be what you're all about, and you might want to steer the conversation beyond that, but I would love to know not only how you got into that, but maybe just a little bit about it for our audience, especially.
Well, I guess I'll start with as I went to Agape International Spiritual Center, where Michael Bernard Beckwith is the minister, spiritual leader. And I started taking classes, and I kept taking classes because I was thirsting for more. And then I became a licensed practitioner, which is, a spiritual counselor. And then they were like, do you want to go to ministerial school? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know that I want to. But I remember, in fact, all the way back to my first new members class, that they had these tapes, and I was like, what are those? And they ended up to be tapes, CDs and tapes. Yeah, we still used cassettes then too. And this was for Holmes Institute. And they were offering a degree in consciousness studies, a master's in consciousness studies, which includes philosophy, psychology, science and spirituality, leadership, theology, and like that. So that was our curriculum towards our master's in consciousness studies. So, it would range all kinds of philosophy classes, psychology classes, spirituality classes, theology.
It's so rich, and I mean, it's what the show's all about, which is like interviewing diverse minds with diverse opinions about like not just the meaning of life, if any, but like even our scientific interpretation of it. And the one stickler in every single person's like caveats for their beliefs is like, yeah, I really don't understand consciousness, and I wish I did. So I'm curious, do you feel like you have a leg up on the average person in understanding it, or even with your advanced degree, is it still just like this wild and woolly subject?
It's a constant exploration. And so now I've been a minister for 16 years, and I can't say that I know everything. I continue to learn, and I thirst to learn more. But I might know a little bit more about consciousness than somebody who never even thought about it, for sure.
do, you, do you remember on the way up on the journey, like any profound things about consciousness that you've learned that maybe like now you kind of think is old hat, but might be interesting for someone to consider? Like what's a dynamic of consciousness that you got into or learned about?
Well, I was looking at science of mind, which is a philosophy, a science, and a way of life. And it's not the same as Scientology. But it was founded by Ernest Holmes in the early 1930s, and his predecessors were people like Fillmore, who is the originator of Unity Village, the Daily Word, those kinds of things. They were all taught by this woman named Emma Curtis Hopkins, who was called the teacher of teachers. So she was a mystic, and so Ernest Holmes' branch was religious science. The Fillmores did theirs. There was divine science, So there's different parts of the New Thought movement that started. They kind of came out of the Transcendentalist movement of the early 1900s. So the influence were like also Ralph Waldo Emerson and, those kinds of people. And Norman Vincent Peale came out of that. And, so this is the exploration. We're the people that ask why. We want to know a little bit more beyond what's on the surface. And so my journey just began taking, what are the foundations of science of mind? What is this spiritual mind treatment, which is a form of affirmative prayer that really is scientific because, it's kind of like God is abundance. I'm one with God, therefore I'm abundant. I give thanks and I release this word. So, whatever your issue is, you face it head on with whatever the principle or quality is. It may be the opposite of what you're experiencing at the moment. And so I continue to, take classes like self-mastery, and was really helping me navigate through life in better ways than I had before. I was equipped to not react so much and start responding. And I continued to take classes and learn more about, people like the founders, like of some of these ideas and ideologies, like Thomas Troward, Emma Curtis Hopkins, Ralph Waldo Emerson, different spiritual, but really creative and highly evolved in their thinking. And so not really people who are kind of just like going along with the rest, that are really kind of expanding, in terms of exploring consciousness. And so as I went forward, I, on my first class, I remember having a mystical experience. It was like I was in bed and I felt myself like going into this deep abyss. And I remember consciously choosing to stay, by earth because I didn't want to be totally lost. And, like the next day when I went to class, I was saying things that I had no knowledge of, but it was coming from me that really was fascinating to me because it was really intelligent and really, correct. And so I was like, okay, I think I'm not in Kansas anymore. Let's see where this is going. Right. And so I just, I followed and I started having more mystical experiences. My grandmother made her transition and it's like the heavens opened up and I was getting all of this information. I was usually the person who presented for the family at those kinds of things because I had an entertainment background. And so stuff started coming up and, this word obedient came out of my mouth, and it wasn't a word that I used, wasn't a word that I liked, and I realized that because I had been obedient, that I was being told that, I can say things through you. And are you going to continue to be obedient? And I kind of played it off like, I didn't have my glasses or whatever, but people were like really like wowed and so I had never heard anybody get like a hearty applause at a funeral before. So it was like, and they were like, there goes the minister. And I was like, whoa, because I had just taken one class and I was like, okay, no, I was just doing a family tribute here, guy. I'm not sure where you're going there. And somebody asked my mother, was I going to be a minister? And she said, no. And I said, well, maybe let's not say no just yet. Because I knew something was going on,
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. It's wow. And I guess it kind of segues into it. But when you talk about mystical experiences, the average person listening to this podcast is very open-minded, but I think everyone just kind of goes to their own different version. When you say a mystical experience, is it like beyond the normal relative experiences we share here on Earth in our experiences? Is it like a dream? Like, is there any way to kind of like describe it a little bit more?
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
My best way of describing it is a direct contact with the spirit.
And is that contact like mental, or is it like a feeling, or is it both?
The information comes through the mental vessel, but it's more than mental. It's spiritual. I was at a conference last month, and I was giving a talk, and I was watching myself give the talk. It was like I was separate from the person who was talking. So it's kind of hard to explain because it's not a normal everyday experience for most people. But it's something that, that fascinates me and thrills me, and I keep doing my spiritual practices, my meditation, my prayer work, my visioning, and all the tools that I use to stay connected to Source. Because really, that's all Jesus did. That's all the spiritual avatars did. Buddha, Krishna. They just stayed in tune with their spirit.
And so, in line with that thought, I think a lot about the difference between happiness and contentment. And as I age, I'm 41, I get much more strongly opinionated about this. And I feel like chasing happiness is really foolish, for me at least. Whereas contentment is really where I'm looking to be. Peaceful, content. And what you said earlier, like reacting less. Because when you're content, you don't see the need to react to things as much. So I'm curious, with all that in mind, and with what you just said about Jesus and Buddha and many other people who have come and gone, is life like a game to you, or do you think it's serious?
Wow. It kind of depends on where I am on any given day. Sometimes it can feel pretty serious when I think about some of the ills of the world that concern me. I don't think that's unchristlike, because I think Jesus was concerned about things that were going on in his lifetime. I know Buddha was, because he changed his whole life, and so there's that dimension, because there's definitely a deep care for humanity and for all of life. But there comes a point when you reach a certain level of spiritual maturity that you don't trip over every single thing, unless you're just going through, a series of challenges and you kind of off center, and then you just have the tools that you recenter so that you don't take everything, to be like a crisis or something. So it kind of, mellows you out so that you're not, getting caught up in the drama and, screaming like a banshee or something,
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it's so interesting. You're so intelligent and so even keeled, and it's really fun to talk to someone like you, because that's, I feel like you're not out to sell me anything, convince me of anything, but you actually care about helping me, and that's really what I think the world needs more of. So kind of on that same note, I think right now, thanks to technology, we're all able to communicate with each other, for better or for worse, a lot more and a lot quicker. Do you think that social issues that were around when Buddha lived, and social issues that were around when Christ lived, and social issues that are around today, do you think they're kind of like the same issues, just reoccurring with new people and new generations? Or do you think like there's an actual like progressive line of what we're doing here on Earth? Like, do you think like humanity is actually working towards some sort of goal, or do you think it's just within each human's life?
I think pretty much people are pretty self-absorbed. I think a lot of the things are the same, but I don't think in Jesus's time or Buddha's time or Krishna's time that anybody was necessarily destroying the environment like we are. I think there was a lot more care and understanding, and certainly at the level of a mystic, it's like the people at Fenhorn in Scotland, they listened to the plants. They didn't try to dominate. They totally got that all screwed up in terms of having dominion. You listen, you coexist with other life forms, whether it's a plant or an animal or whatever, to the extent that it's, safe to do so, but I think basically in terms of the human to human kinds of things, the judgment things that, they were judging women back in Jesus's day. They didn't like Mary Magdalene. She was a mystic too, and they really didn't like that she was smarter than they were, and there are people that, are protected, but, Siddhartha, before he became the Buddha, he didn't have to be out there. He had a very wealthy and comfortable life. But to see sickness and to see poverty and to see old age, it troubled him. And he wanted to participate in bringing people peace. So, we're kind of dealing with the same kinds of things, except for we don't seem to have evolved from that mindset. In fact, we seem to be kind of spiraling out into, destructive things. And it's just the progression seems to be inches instead of miles,
Yeah, well said. If not depressing, but well said. Uh,
It is what it is, right?
yeah, no, exactly. And actually, here's kind of like, I'm not steering a ship in any direction, but as you were speaking just now about that, I did start thinking it would probably be an appropriate time to ask you, do you believe in like other dimensions and other life forms that like perhaps humans could be partaking in different lives and stuff like that? Or do you believe that this is it? There's just the human show?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely other dimensions.
So from that perspective, I'm not asking this in a cynical way. It might sound like that to someone who doesn't know me. I care more about the environment than any other issue for sure. So I'm asking just maybe to like quell my own fears and anxieties, but what ultimately would be the cost if we like killed ourselves off? I mean, if there's other dimensions and there's other life, what would make this one so precious that would be a tragedy?
Well, I think that there isn't anything that's unnecessary. This particular dimension is a school in and of itself, and it has the capacity to teach us more about our true nature. So I don't think it's necessarily disposable, and I don't think that life would end if Earth ended. So I'm not sure if that's your question.
No, that really was my question, and I'm not even interested on, like, you've explained on what authority you're answering it from, which is why I felt comfortable asking you. And normally I would wait until after asking the next question, which is the only canned question in the podcast, as you know, which is, what do you actually think happens when you die? And I always make sure I'm extra clear now, because I've done this 80-something times. I don't mean, like, what happens in general to other people. I'm really curious about, like, your real interpretation and envisionment of what will happen to you when you die.
I think that consciousness is eternal. I think that my essence lives and it goes to another dimension. I don't know what I will embody, in terms of whether it's a human or something else. I could just merely be an energy until I decide I may want to have another experience to learn a lesson. I just don't think that, life is that finite.
And is the I that decides the I that's talking to me right now, or is that like what some people refer to as a higher self?
I would say that it's my soul. And I think soul is eternal. The rest of the stuff, it changes. I mean, bodies you don't really need. Minds are, for communication. But the soul is the essence that has its own way of communicating and resolving what it needs to know.
And so with all this background that we've explored in the first part of this podcast, I'm curious for what your life work is, which is helping people, which is amazing. And thank you, just in case that wasn't clear at any point in this interview. Thank you. Helping people and doing it the way you do it is just so inspiring to me, but also like, I think it's really just ultimately what we're here to do. So with that in mind, is the advice you give people when you're helping someone, does it change based on like their age, or is the advice pretty much the same? You're just putting it in a different conceptual model for the person to get it better?
Well, I don't think any of us are boilerplates. I think everybody has a unique experience. Not that the same types of things don't happen to different people. The basic things, health, relationships, finances are things that people deal with all the time. But how you handle that emotionally, how you handle that psychologically, how you handle challenges that come up in life, you have to kind of look at the cause. You have to kind of look at where you became separate from your good in terms of your mindset, your thought processes. So I explore it from that point of view, but I also look at it from, what are the qualities that are inherent in everyone? There's goodness, whether it's obvious or not. There's some level of beauty, there's some level of joy, there's some level of wisdom, and all of us are whole, even if we don't look like it. We may be missing a limb or an eye or something, but there's something that is common to all of us that we share. And because we share that, I call it spirit, I may call it Elohim, God, whatever. It's that lives in all things that are, even if it's like, a chair, it was made out of wood, or some element that came from the earth, So, we're all, walking each other home. And so we get to relate to each other at the level of our understanding.
I love that. That's such a beautiful phrase. Wow. We're all walking each other home. I love that. Thank you. I guess I'm just kind of curious because it helps me to hear someone as measured and responsible and kind as you are to relate their own journey. So like, what is an example of like a time where you were able to help yourself because you've done all this hard work? So like, you don't have to get into the specifics like of what happened to you, but like when you dealt with something like really, truly traumatic, it doesn't have to be that recent, but like, what's the difference between being a person with no direction and then a person who's been studying and working hard for it?
Probably self-love. I had internalized racism, internalized sexism, internalized homophobia, and all of this was about other people's perceptions. And so this was up to me to be able to say, I'm not, I'm not, some kind of victim, and I'm not, inferior, and I'm certainly an essential part of life, and to really cultivate my own self-loving. And that's what I hope to do when I support other people in their journey.
That's really cool. And I think it's so helpful to hear that, because I think my biggest problem is exactly how I would phrase it, is like when the dominant ideology tells you you're pathetic and you don't want to give into that, but you do feel pathetic. And it's like this circle. So what's your advice when the person can't believe that it's true? So I'd actually like to use race because I think that's a really good one. Like, what if a person, like they grow up in an environment where people are racist to them, and then they actually start to think, oh, these people are right. Like, how do you get out of that?
And to me, it's the connection with spirit. There is an unconditional love that I have access to, and I lean into that and allow myself to feel that love that's powerful, that is not going to change. And that is what helps me be restored to who I truly am as a spiritual being having a human experience.
That's wow. Celeste, I can tell that you professionally speak and go around and talk about this a lot because your answers are quick. They're not canned, but they're quick. Like, you're very sharp and clear about all this, and it's so wonderful to hear it.
I'm direct.
Yeah. I like it.
I like to get to the point.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's perfect on a podcast because I'm getting to ask like probably 18 more questions than I normally have time for. So we've addressed a lot of like what people can and can't do to help themselves, and I thought that last part that you said about self-love coming from not self, from like the greater love of the universe. Is there like a quick resource for people who are new to this jargon, new to this idea? Like, what would be a good reference point for them to kind of get started? And obviously you do have books, so I would highly recommend those to anyone who likes you. So I would like to say that on your behalf.
Yeah, my website, CelesteFrazier.com. And my books, one book talks about my journey into my spiritual life. One book talks about how to get through the year, through 52 weeks of practicing the presence. And my latest book, which just came out last month, is really kind of based on the Course in Miracles. I would say, my teacher, Michael Beckwith, is another place to go, agapelive.com. There are lots of classes that are available. I have an app that I need to give some more attention to, but it's called Conscious Grace. It's on Google and on Apple, and there's different classes, and I'll do some live teaching, and I'll do some some recordings and things. So there are lots of resources. If you look up the word New Thought Movement in Google, it might take you down a rabbit hole where you might find some interesting things. You might see something about the people that I've talked about.
And so when you had this mystical experience, is there any risk that a person is not having a mystical experience but thinks it is one? Like, I'm thinking of people who hear voices, because hearing a voice could actually be totally normal. It could be part of a mystical experience, and then it could also be something different.
I would say that you kind of have a sense that something deeper is going on, and that it's not just a voice or a sound, but it's another dimension, it's another depth, not just your regular self-talk. It's something beyond that.
Thank you. So I always give my guests the very last chance to talk. You're on a podcast. We've got hundreds of listeners, and hopefully they're going to listen to what you have to say.
I would like to say that love is, and I would like to say that it is never going to die. And if it doesn't show up in your experience, to breathe in and breathe out and imagine what love would be like and allow that to wash over yourself and just have a moment or two of peace, just enjoying that. Because that will probably open you up to something greater than what you've been experiencing.
Wow. Well, that was profound, as were most of your answers to my questions today, even the not profound questions. So, Celeste Frazier, thank you again so much for coming on our podcast. Everyone who's listening, in the liner notes will be her website, but it's celestefrazier.com. So be sure to check it out. Please do give attention to her books and other things. And also, if you like any of them, please let me know. Give me feedback, and I'll pass it on to her. And for everyone listening, we always appreciate your support. The best way to support the show is just to head over to mikeyop.com and sign up for the free subscription to the weekly email that comes with the podcast. And for everyone listening at home, my name is Mike Oppenheim, and we will see you soon.
And I see you hear this tune, and I feel that you're near me, and I sing, you are my moon.